lock my door so the kid doesn't walk in.
All right, so welcome to another fantastic episode of Global Conversations. Today, we're joined by a visionary leader reshaping the equity, inclusion, belonging landscape. It's my pleasure to welcome Jill Feliciano, the Global Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging at HighSpot, Board Advisor of Included. The Chief Navigators magazine named her one of the top 10 influential women in diversity and inclusion, and at the time of this recording is a nominee of the Diversity Award at the Black Tech Awards. And one of my people that I know throughout my career, Amanda, is someone that's also within your cohort of nominees. So congratulations to that. And so definitely today we will discuss empathetic leadership, especially in the tech sector. So with that, happy Black History, Black Heritage, Black Futures Month, Jill.
Oh my gosh, what an amazing intro. I should, ask you to come along with me to like every room. I mean, the intro was amazing.
Hey.
But I'm thrilled to be here and really just grateful to have this conversation, just given the current state and landscape of diversity, equity, inclusion across the globe, but specifically within North America and the US. There are some really interesting thoughts and quite frankly, news media happening around this topic. So I think this is just timely and excited to dive in.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like I mentioned at the outset, it's great to have you. I've seen you, present on the social media webs, especially with your current role, what you've been talking about, all the publications about you, the videos about you over the last year. So it was just a match made in heaven, so to speak, to have you on here. So definitely, let's get started here. So.
Yeah.
As I usually start this conversation with my guests, I want them to just dive into who you are as an individual instead of me blurbing a whole thing about you. I mean, yes, I did a little bit of introduction, but here we are. So, Jill, tell everyone about yourself, your journey, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just really look at myself as someone who loves people. I really enjoy creating environments where it allows people to just breathe and be who they are, be proud of where they come from, their ideas, their perspectives. It's been somewhat of a gift that I've had as a child. And really excited that I actually figured out what to do with it professionally. But a little bit about me, just context. So I am from Chicago, Illinois, so born and raised. I'm the granddaughter of civil rights activists here within the city. So 60s, 70s, I was the kid outside of the town hall. All my grandparents, were in there championing for different legislations, right? Fair, housing, acts, talking about just different things in terms of gender equality, racial ethnic equality when it comes down to healthcare disparities as well as education. And, it's really what I've known, to be quite frank. But, later on, moved on to pursue my undergrad degree at Purdue University and majored in comms and, just didn't really know what I wanted to do. I jumped into an internship opportunity that led to a full-time opportunity within a financial services organization. So I grew up within that industry by trade, I guess. I am an operational engineer. However, as I was really navigating the hallways of that institution for the first 10 years of my career, I often felt alone. I was the only one in the room. And what I mean by that is I oftentimes were, the only one that identified as a woman, a person of color. I'm neurodivergent. I'm married to the military. I became a mom in that setting. So I literally was every other or ism that you can
Yeah.
think of.
Yeah.
And, Andre, just to be open and real, for the first, 8 years of that career, I learned how to mask. I learned how to code switch so that I could fit in, assimilate, hopefully grow my career at the same rate of my peers, because it was important, right? Like I had to provide for a family. But about year 8, I got tired of masking, code switching,
Yeah.
learning and watching movies that I had no interest in just so that I can contribute to conversations. And just made a decision that I was going to, from that day forward, bring my authentic self to the workplace. And I
Mhm.
did. And it was interesting because once I did, it unlocked so much innovation. I helped that company launch their first ever global operations, so expanding to a different country and lifting our business processes from the US to those global sites. I challenged our, recruiting practices and had an opportunity to move into not only the operational engineering space, but just move into diversity and inclusion within that organization. So that's how I ended up in the work from my personal lived experiences.
Mhm.
And then really meshed my passion for loving people and creating spaces where people truly authentically thrive.
No, that's an excellent story. I mean, even, as you mentioned about the isms here, I mean, this is the what you bring is the true definition of what intersectionality is all about. And a lot of people still to this day really don't understand that concept and want to box people in their certain silos and whatnot. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, this work is about being intersectional, understanding that everyone is different, everyone is unique, but bring those diverse talents, experiences, et cetera, to an organization to make an organization thrive. And throughout your career, from what I've heard from you, what I've seen from you, is that that's how you've thrived in your career, and that's how and that's how you like to embed that into your organizations that you've worked for, especially at HighSpot. So I commend you for your journey and all that you've done in your career, and as people are starting to listen to who you are throughout our conversation, I'm excited to hear that, and hopefully everyone else will be able to listen in and be excited for you and with you in terms of that. So
Yeah. Exciting.
exactly. So definitely, one thing outside of what you've mentioned, the other thing that I ask about my guests is, if someone were to come and ask you anything, that something random, what would they say about, what would you say to them that is unique about you?
That is a really great question. And if you're okay with it, I'll share two things.
Sure.
The first is I'm a former basketball player. I didn't play in the WNBA, but I was all about basketball. I'm
Uh-huh.
like 5'3". Loved being a point guard. Grew up in that Michael Jordan era. And later on, after graduating from college, became a basketball coach within our local youth program. So when folks see me and just kind of see me on this platform, they never make the connection like, oh, she's a ball player, a former ball player.
Yeah.
So I think that's one. And then secondly, I was in the movie Save the Last Dance with Julia Stiles. This movie, came out early 2000s, but I got to showcase my dance moves in that movie. So
Oh, now I'm gonna really have to see this. I'm gonna have to go back and see this. Oh my gosh, that's something I didn't know. But that's, hey, so I got a dance star over here. So, oh no, that's
well,
that.
I'm a little rusty now. Joints are,
Ah.
a little older, I'll try. I'll try.
Wow. No, that's great news, and I love to hear that. And these are the stories I like to hear. And so, Jill, you know, as I mentioned at the outset, you've built an impressive career developing and implementing global EDI strategies, predominantly in the tech sector, or recently in the tech sector. So let's begin with the core aspect of your work. The episode itself, we're talking about empathetic leadership. So why do you think it's crucial today?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the current tech landscape, especially for kind of those mid-sized to smaller tech companies, we've experienced a lot of change, whether
Hmm.
it's the external, economic climate, whether it's internal organizational changes, and let's be honest, like we are all reading the articles
Yeah.
about the many layoffs that are impacting the tech industry at the moment, right? And that really spans across big, small, medium. And with that change, leaders still have to be laser focused on running and operating a business,
Hmm.
right? And in doing so, we have to recognize that the people who sit in the seats every day that make the
Hmm.
machine run are having, these, continuous changes, right? And having these experiences that can challenge the way that they feel connected to the industry or the
Yeah.
organization itself. And how do we actually tap into people who are having these experiences? How do we know what they need right now? Maybe if trust is eroded,
Hmm.
or their circumstances have changed. How do we make sure that we still have people engaged and invested to get the ball across,
Hmm.
the line, right? Like you still have to operate. And how you do that is truly through empathetic leadership, right?
Hmm.
We're seeing, especially as we have now a workforce with a generation of workers that span across four different generations.
Yeah.
And I think right now is the time where leaders understand the generational differences and the uniquenesses of the needs, let alone the
Hmm.
intersectionality of folks. But leaders are now finding themselves having to deliver hard decisions and messaging,
Hmm.
and the way that those really resonate and connect to people, to the broader vision or new visions or the changes, is through being real.
Hmm.
And when you're real, people feel the empathetic connection that leaders have with you, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
for a leader to say, hey, I know this change is really tough, and I'm not excited about it either. In
Yeah.
fact, let
Yeah.
me tell you, the process that I went through, and thinking about it, right? And I want you to know that I see you and that
Hmm.
you have been through this change as well. But let me help you connect the dots in terms of why you're important, what it is
Hmm.
we'd love for you to contribute, and that we see, a vision or a career for you here, right? It's those authentic and empathetic conversations that we need to move into to keep the workforce engaged in
Hmm.
driving productivity. But people need to know that you care,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
Period, right?
Yeah.
And leaders, right? So leaders need to take that shell off and show up in a way that's human. That's really what empathetic leadership is about. And that
Hmm.
gains trust, it gains perspective, it creates psychological safety. And quite frankly, you'll have a workforce that's actually engaged and sitting in it
Hmm.
with the leader and wanting to help, move through the hurdles, the challenges, and celebrate the success. And that's where you're going to start to see the pack separates from itself
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
tech era, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's in the tech sector where number one, it's the traditional, I guess if you want to call stereotype of the bro culture, and it's been hard for women to engage in that space. How do leaders especially embrace everyone together that they can do that, and I, hearing from you, it's having that empathy given the current economic climate, given the current social climate, etc. So, you know, as we're talking about different leadership styles, I've spoken about inclusive leadership, uh, but then let's talk about it in that sense of, with respect to empathetic leadership. Is there a difference in inclusive leadership styles and empathetic leadership, or they run in the same circles? And more so, how does creating an empathetic workplace look like in practice, especially not only in the tech sector, but also in a global context?
Yeah, that's a really great question.
Yeah.
And thank you for posing one that I'm actually thinking about right now,
Yeah.
which I love. So bring it on. But I would say the two coexist.
Hmm.
Okay. So there are elements, that sit in each of the bucket, like they can span across those different categories. But I think, when I think about inclusive leadership, that is more of a leader taking action, doing something to set up the environment to signal to people that they are welcome, right?
Hmm.
So I'll use a very like basic example. Me as a leader recognizing that 50% of my direct reports are caregivers. And I am
Yeah.
going to actively choose, take the action to move the meeting, our weekly meetings, to a time that works for everybody, right? That's inclusive leadership, is thinking
Hmm.
about what people need so they know that they can be successful in the environment, right?
Right, right, right,
But when you lean into empathetic leadership, that's more emotional. It's you
right.
putting yourself right in that person's shoes. It's you, researching and learning about the outcomes of caregivers in the workplace. It's you, reaching out to caregivers that outside of the workplace, interviewing them on their exam or their experience because you want to feel and better
Hmm.
connect emotionally to
Hmm.
what that experience is for people, right?
Hmm.
So, yes, some of that is an inclusive leadership because you still have to actively listen and,
Right.
be compassionate. But man, to put yourself in their shoes as best as you can and learn inside and outside of the workplace is where empathy is built.
Yeah. And as I'm hearing you talk, there's, as you mentioned, emotions.
Mhm.
There's that whole continuum, if you will, of from emotional intelligence to cultural intelligence, especially when we're coming to the global context, and then bringing in all of that in terms of the, you know, from an operations transformational leadership style to this
Yeah.
inclusive leadership style, and then taking it over. So it's almost like as we talk about the intelligence continuum, it's almost like a cycle from what I'm hearing from you, especially as we're reverting back to the skills that are necessary for leaders to have in order to create that psychological safety, and have that culture of openness and whatnot. And that's exactly what I'm hearing from you. And yeah, is there, I'm pretty sure you want to add to something about along those lines.
Well, yeah, I think, if we think about what empathetic leadership is in practice, I think there are a few things that we look out for as practitioners. And you named it. The first one is understanding emotions, right? EQ, EQ, EQ. But EQ takes work. And,
Oh yeah.
that's the piece where you have to go above and beyond just your day to day interactions to truly
Hmm.
understand and impact with the varying differences of folks within your organization,
Yeah.
right? So EQ is one. The second is active listening.
Hmm.
Are you quick to share your perspective instead of pausing, sitting back and learning and listening from others?
Hmm.
I think we've all seen those team members or leaders that are just listening to like quickly respond or rebuttal because
Yeah.
they know
Yeah.
the
Yep. Yep.
answer,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Versus someone who may think they know the answer, but they're going to sit back and listen. That they're curious about others' perspectives, and they're willing to actually amend their recommendation or the thoughts that they had on the topic based upon the information that they're open to receiving through active listening.
Yeah.
When you think about compassionate decision making, oh, one of my favorites, by the way. But it's like I'm making a decision, but also understanding how will this impact the experience, the livelihood, as well as the ability for the folks in front of me to be successful. Like I can think about the impacts to the team based upon the decisions that I make.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've seen that competency as a primary competency of a lot of just folks, in the workforce. And it's not anyone's fault, by the way, Andre. I have to say this, like that
Yeah.
is something that's actually a newer muscle that I believe we are asking leaders to learn.
Hmm.
Because, when I started, even though, I like to say I'm 21, but when I started my career over 20 years ago, this empathetic leadership wasn't a thing, right?
No,
It
no.
wasn't like a leadership style that was taught to us. Like even when I was taking my MBA courses, it was more heavy around business acumen, managing workflow and, your P&L, but this
Yeah,
EQ piece is new. And I want to
yeah.
recognize that and also applaud leaders who are in their individual journey. Hang in there, you will get there for sure. And then, I think the last one is building relationships.
Yeah.
They're going to take the time to get to know their people, and be thoughtful about what that means in terms of their communication style, how they
Mhm.
influence, and how they get the best out of their folks. So those are just some examples of the
Yeah.
characteristics that we tend to look for within empathetic leadership.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm thinking about even my career going through the journey of, first leaders were hard asses, you know, and telling people what to do. Then it becomes, trying to be on the same level as them. And now it's like, okay, you have to be on the same level, listen, learn, be open to different thoughts and opinions, et cetera. And now we're at this stage of getting back to emotions, and especially with the hard times, as I mentioned, and as you mentioned as well, in terms of what we're experiencing in life and in general. And it's because of the tech sector. This is what we're experiencing, the technology and stuff, right? So, but I want
Mm.
to flip it on its head a little bit. Have you ever experienced people coming to you and saying, empathetic leadership, that's soft, or that's something that we don't want to find ourselves being part of, in our leadership journey? So, what are some common misunderstandings, or from your experience, have people come to you and said to you, that's not a leadership style I want to be part of?
Well, I won't say that I've had an interaction with a
Yeah,
leader that
yeah,
that flat out refused, but I think right now it's more curiosity and understanding why it's important, you know.
yeah,
And I think, depending on just the type of leader you are, and understanding who your people are, the data too will tell you what type of leadership style you may want to adapt quickly, right?
yeah, yep, yep,
So it's more for me, it's connecting the dots. And actually, I think one of the things that we as leaders have to understand and come to terms with is that people change.
yep.
Like the group of people that are sitting in the workforce today weren't the group of people, that, were at the workforce 20 years ago, right? So the experiences, COVID, Black Lives Matter, Asian anti-hate, LGBTQ legislation, like all of those things have shaped and formed who people are that sit before you today. And I think
Hmm.
that's the piece that's really hard for maybe leaders who were trained, 20 years ago to understand the evolution of people, the person that sits in front of you today. And I think
Yeah.
that's the big disconnect,
Hmm.
where I spend a lot of my time connecting those dots for leaders, because leaders want to drive, they want to drive action,
Yeah.
right? They want people to, do something, right? Change your behavior, in the best interest of achieving the business goals. And I think what they're learning is the approach has to be different now.
Yeah.
It has to be different,
Yeah.
and helping them come to terms with the differences, and then helping them adapt who they are today as a leader
Hmm.
to maybe who they need to become and grow into for tomorrow, if they're going to continue to engage people, bring out the best of them, continue to grow, future leaders on their team so that they can
Hmm.
be, in the top of their category, whatever industry, whatever product, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's where I spend a lot of my time. And again, it's no fault, right, of leaders. Like I want to be very clear about that. But
Yeah.
once they are aware, it is our responsibility to take action and challenge the growth of who we are in the way that we lead an organization.
Definitely. And even listening to you speak about this, one of the things that come to mind is leaders need to be agile, in
Hmm.
this world. And definitely, this is a skill not a lot of people have. And as you mentioned at the outset, one of the things, as I'm hearing this, is that because we have these intergenerational shifts, uh, or generational shifts, I should say, where leaders need to be agile and start learning about what makes someone tick. How do you keep some, because retention is critical for the business, right? Because and that's something that we need to start really thinking about. So from an operations side, how does that look? From a people side, how does that look? All of that put together. And there's so much, including empathetic leadership is, how do you build all that and forget all the naysayers in terms of this work? It's more, how do we look like as leaders, right? And that's something that's definitely critical in this conversation.
100%. And I think the other piece that is for me, this like aha about empathetic leadership is that, I think we as leaders, we often believe that we should have all the answers and we should know everything.
Right.
That's not for all leaders, but that is what, what I typically find.
Yeah.
And that, mindset is very counterintuitive to empathetic leadership.
Right.
But what's really interesting is for those leaders who are moving into this new, realm or way of leading, they're learning that if they lean in with vulnerability, their teams will then lean back. And I think it's a sigh of relief, because they then create an environment where folks, within their organization can help them co-create culture that they thrive in.
Yeah.
Right. That is so critical. It is so important. And for leaders who are now taking that walk, they're like, okay, it's not all on me to figure this out.
Definitely.
And we can't figure it out because the needs of our people evolve daily, and we need them to have a platform where they can speak up, they can voice, they can help us, create the culture or the process, or, together work to solve a business challenge. But you only can do that through psychological safety, and empathetic leadership really is kind of that first step to making sure psychological safety is felt and received by the folks that we're leading.
Yeah, definitely. Great advice there. And, as the theme of this conversation and my webcast is all about how do we connect globally, and in our world and in your world especially, how does technology play a role in advancing empathetic leadership in your thoughts and your experience with EDIB, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in global organizations for the first half of my career. And it's interesting. It's all I knew, right? So as I moved to, companies across different industries, those that are considered more mid-size or startup, they were kind of starting their global expansion initiatives, right? So I'm sitting kind of in the middle of it. So it's really interesting that you are kind of moving into this topic. But I think there's a few things. One, we have to understand that co-creation of culture is so incredibly critical, especially across different geographies.
Yeah.
And what oftentimes happens is, where the company is headquartered or based out of, they typically set the dominant culture, right? The behaviors that are acceptable, how we work, when we work, how we communicate, right? And I would challenge those leaders to really understand that as they either expand or if they're currently across different geos, it's time to take a step back and do an evaluation of the culture. And the question that I always, put in front of leaders is, can inclusion be felt across the globe?
All right.
Right. So like making them sit in each of the regions and saying, here is what that feels like, right? If you're sitting in France versus here's what this feels like if you're sitting in Germany. Okay, let's sit in Canada, right? And to just do that exercise can be so incredibly eye-opening.
Yeah.
I also challenge leaders and managers to also travel if, budget allows, because to sit in an environment and to have the experience, pushing us back to empathetic leadership, right? One of the core components, right?
Yeah.
Right? and
Yeah.
say, oh my gosh, this all hands is horrible. Like I can't
Yeah.
hear, the audio shoddy. Oh my gosh, this isn't relevant to this group that I'm sitting with. It gives you a very different perspective. And I think that's one of the most important steps folks can take.
Yeah.
But I think on the other hand, as I'm meeting with some of my peers in, kind of the DEI space, we're really challenging ourselves on how we use technology to scale global culture.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're focusing on at HighSpot, and we're really, really excited. And some of those examples are we are implementing a global inclusion chatbot.
Mm-hmm.
So each of our employees can now use that chatbot. So think ChatGPT, so generative AI, to ask it questions about, cultural nuances, right? I'm going to, maybe I'm sitting in a meeting and someone shares a pronoun that I'm not familiar with, right?
Yep.
I
Yep.
can
Yep.
ask the chat, right, what that pronoun is, what it means, and how I should talk about it or not. Right. So to
Mm-hmm.
have that real time interaction and have that, information available is helpful. It
Mm-hmm.
also translates in 50 different languages, and just provides equity and understanding and learning about one another. And quite frankly, that is only the first step, right? Because you have to put it in
Yeah.
practice. But sometimes,
Yeah.
Andre, folks are afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know who to ask. And by
Mm-hmm.
removing that barrier, it allows everyone to start the journey at their own pace and start to get
Mm-hmm.
some of those insights as they take the next step forward, right?
Yeah.
And being inclusive. So that's an example of like how we're scaling technology to create inclusive dialogue conversations and build cultural competence. So
Yeah.
really excited about that. I think the other piece is through data analytics, to
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
quite frank.
Yeah.
And I think HR data has been something that has been top of mind for a lot of, leaders, right? People data, quite frankly. And that's why I'm really excited to join Included as one of their board advisors. So Included ultimately created a platform that uses generative AI to architect stories around employee journeys. So
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
can see instantaneously where there are hotspots in the organization, right? And you can see hotspots, meaning retention risks, challenges in terms of engagement across different regions. You can cut it by any demographic possible, but
Yep.
we're using it to look at the regional experience. And quite frankly, we're also building, metrics around inclusion at each of the regional levels so that we can
Mm-hmm.
have curated strategies that tailor to the needs of those employees. So AI is, I call it AI for good, right? Because
Yeah. Of course.
right. So Included, they're really onto something. And then I think the last piece that I'll mention about that is Included also allows us to do predictive analytics.
Mm-hmm.
So it will alert us to say, hey, you may have an issue with retention in Germany, and
Yeah.
here is why. So before it becomes a trend based upon, past attributions and experiences, right? Here are some steps you may want to take because we've
Mm-hmm.
seen this play out before, right?
Yeah.
Historically
Yeah.
in
Yep.
Europe,
Yep.
right? Yep. So it allows us to really stop trends from persisting, and then knowing which leaders, managers, and teams we need to better support.
Yeah. Definitely. And it's as I'm listening to our conversation, I can think of 5 different episodes on this, whether it's, especially the AI component, right? And that's your bread and butter of what you do. And tying that into empathetic leadership is such an amazing transition, especially in, with all that leaders are going through, whether you're
Mhm.
working in tech, whether you're working in a nonprofit, when you're, all of that. There's so many components here, and what you gave was an excellent synopsis as to what leaders should be thinking about in this day and age and how to be agile. And I'm really happy that this is happening, especially now, and for people to start listening to in the future. And so I want to close off by just rolling it back a little and saying, or asking you, what advice would you give to leaders now who are striving to be empathetic leaders?
Oh, that was such a great question. What would I say to leaders? Well, I think the first thing that's really important to highlight is that empathetic leadership is a muscle that needs to be built over time, right?
Right.
And I think for some leaders who just maybe haven't had exposure to what empathetic leadership is, let alone see it in practice, or just like, how do I actually go to the gym, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's important to recognize that it is a journey, and you may stumble. You will stumble along the
Yep.
way. You will
Mhm.
make mistakes, and that's okay. It's a part of your learning. Get back up, dust yourself off, and
Mhm.
keep going. Keep
Mhm.
going.
Mhm.
Right. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is recognizing that empathetic leadership is really built through continuous experience.
Mhm.
Okay. It is something that requires effort and intention.
Yep.
Similar to, and I've shared this openly on different podcasts, but like I'm on a, wellness journey, right? And, I want to lose 50 pounds. And, I want to say to myself, hey, body, in the morning, I want you to be 50 pounds lighter. Okay.
Yeah.
My mind is there. I want it to happen. I'm saying all the words, right? I wake up and I'm still, kind of in the same body that I was yesterday. And that's because, change happens with continuous effort, right?
Right.
You need those continuous experiences. So, challenging leaders to say, how are you changing your environment to step in the shoes of other people who you don't have, the same experience as, right?
Mhm.
Um, are you sitting in ERG events? Are you going to become an executive sponsor of an employee community? Are you going to spend some time with the interns? Are
Yeah.
you are you spending time with folks outside of your department to understand who they are, their experiences?
Mhm.
And then even externally, there are organization groups or just, friends, your network, have conversations with them about
Mhm.
experiences and challenges. Sometimes that's a little bit more safer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's low risk. It's low risk, right? So put yourself in situations, environments that you are not familiar with. That is
Yeah.
the only way you build empathy for
Yeah.
others. And quite frankly, I think it's a humbling practice for us as leaders to sit in an environment where, our authority is irrelevant, right? Our, perspective is irrelevant. And we actually have to, really lean in with humility and listen and learn and figure out if we're saying the right things. Like that
Yeah.
practice is really great. And quite frankly, is the experience of how people see us in
Yeah.
the workplace. So I think that also builds some EQ and some emotional connection to just the humans.
Definitely. Definitely. So, Jill, I want to thank you so much for so many little nuggets in our conversation. You've brought up a lot, and there's a lot for leaders and those who aspire to be leaders to think about in this day and age. And I know, in your work, there's always going to be something that inspires you, whether it's a song or a book, and how it gets you through the day. So, what's that one song that actually says, "Hey, I'm ready to go"?
Oh my gosh. All right. This is such a good question. So unexpected. That one song.
As she goes to her Spotify playlist.
Yes, I am. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Lovely Day by Bill Withers.
Okay.
And the reason being is I believe that happiness, I think about just being motivated, regardless of your circumstances, is a choice. And
Mm-hmm.
like I wake up every day and I'm like, this is gonna be a good day.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find the light out of everything that's happening. I'm gonna be appreciative for that light, right? Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
one person who sends me a Slack like, hey Jill, I heard, you say this. Thank you so much. Right. Like that is the thing that will keep me going. So choosing to start your day with the mindset that it's going to be a lovely day is
Yeah.
really what gets me through. Just
Yeah.
open real.
No, definitely, definitely. And so with that, how can people find you, Jill?
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Jill Feliciano. I am very active. I answer messages, so would love to just hear thoughts from viewers as well as learnings from all of you. No
Mhm.
one is an expert in everything, and I continuously am inspired by folks across the corporate landscape, all levels, backgrounds. Like, I want to hear from you. I want to learn from you.
Yeah.
So reach out there.
Thank you very much for this, Jill. I really appreciate our talk. And with that, another episode of Global Conversations webcast is done, and looking forward to seeing everyone on the next episode. So thank you again, Jill, for all this.
My pleasure.
All right.
All right. I know Riverside, so I won't hit anything until upload is complete.